When most people picture Japan's past, they think of samurai swords flashing under cherry blossoms, Kyoto temples resting in silence, or the Tokugawa shoguns locking the country behind bamboo curtains. But what if I told you that Japan's story is missing entire civilizations? People whose history was not just ignored, but deliberately pushed off the map. Long before the modern Japanese identity took shape, there were two cultures whose fingerprints are still hidden beneath the surface: the Ainu of the north and the Ryukyuans of the far south. These were not fringe tribes or footnotes. They had kingdoms, belief systems, languages, trade networks, and identities completely distinct from the Japan we think we know. Before the emperors, before the samurai, and before the word Japan meant anything at all, there was a land of forests, ice, and myth. The region now called Hokkaido wasn't always part of Japan. For thousands of years, it was the homeland of a people whose worldview didn't orbit around emperors or rice fields. They called themselves Ainu, a word meaning simply human beings. Imagine winter lasting half the year, rivers iced over so thick a horse could walk across, bears bigger than anything seen on the mainland. This is where the Ainu didn't just live, they thrived. While the ancestors of the Japanese, the Yamato people, were developing wet rice agriculture down south, the Ainu mastered hunting, fishing, and gathering. They didn't worship gods in the way many civilizations did. Instead, they believed everything, animals, trees, even household objects, contained living spirits called kamui. When they hunted, they weren't taking life. They were honoring spirits sent into the world in physical form. Bears weren't animals, they were divine guests wearing fur. And when they sent a bear spirit back to its world, they didn't hide the ritual, they celebrated it. The most misunderstood Ainu ritual is Iyomante, known casually as the bear ceremony. Outsiders once painted it as savage. The Japanese government banned it. Western travelers sensationalized it. But to the Ainu, it was not about killing. It was about returning a divine spirit with respect. A bear cub was raised by the village like a royal guest. When the time came, the ceremony included songs, offerings, and prayers that asked the kamui to remember the Ainu fondly when it returned to its own world. This wasn't brutality, it was profound spirituality wrapped in a reality shaped by nature. Linguists still don't know where the Ainu language came from. It doesn't belong to Japanese. It doesn't connect to Chinese, Korean, or Polynesian tongues. It stands alone, what scholars call a language isolate. That makes it as rare as Basque in Europe or Sumerian in ancient Mesopotamia. Even their oral traditions are unlike anything in the Japanese mainland. They didn't write history in ink. They performed it in epic chants known as yuka. These could last hours, sometimes days, and were passed from one storyteller to the next like living libraries. But if their culture was so distinct, how did they vanish from the mainstream story? The Ainu weren't conquered in a single war. There wasn't one decisive battle, like Sekigahara. Instead, it was a quiet encroachment over centuries. In early Japanese records, Hokkaido wasn't even part of Japan. It was called Ezochi, the land of the barbarians. Trade began first, mostly in seafood, bear pelts, and metal tools. But the relationship was never equal. As Japanese merchants, samurai, and fishermen set up bases along the southern coast of Hokkaido, disputes escalated. In the 15th and 16th centuries, tensions erupted into open conflict. The most famous of these was the Koshimane uprising in 1457, where Ainu warriors nearly expelled the Japanese settlers before being defeated. Then came Shakushine's war in the 1660s. Shakushine, an Ainu chieftain, led a sweeping resistance against Japanese expansion. For a moment, it looked like the Ainu could reclaim their land entirely. But Japan responded with coordinated brutality. Once he was betrayed and killed, resistance shattered. Southern Hokkaido fell under Japanese control, but the north remained culturally Ainu until the Meiji era arrived like a tidal wave. In 1869, right after the Meiji Restoration, the government made a strategic decision: rename Ezochi to Hokkaido. and declare it part of Japan, but it wasn't a civil incorporation. This was colonization, and the Ainu were treated as former natives who needed to be civilized. They were banned from speaking their language in public. They were forced to take Japanese names. Their hunting lifestyle was criminalized. Their lands were seized and redistributed to Japanese settlers. The government passed the Hokkaido Former Aborigines Protection Act in 1899, a law that, ironically, erased more of their culture than it protected. The Ainu weren't just conquered, they were made invisible. To understand how suffocating this assimilation was, imagine this. You're told your name is illegal, your ceremonies are barbaric, your clothing is inappropriate, your language has no value, your land doesn't belong to you. Then you're assigned farmland in soil you don't know how to cultivate, forbidden from hunting in forests that once nourished your people, and taxed by a government that doesn't acknowledge your history. By the early 1900s, many scholars, and even government officials, believed the Ainu would go extinct within a generation. Photographers treated them like museum pieces, posing them in native outfits for postcards tourists could buy. Meanwhile, their children sat in Japanese-only schools, learning that Ainu identity was something to be ashamed of. Some intermarried with Japanese settlers and blended into society in silence. Others held onto traditions in whispers and shadows. Many pretended to be ethnically Japanese because discrimination was that severe. Even today, there are thousands of people in Japan with Ainu ancestry who were raised not to speak of it. But in the late 20th century, something changed. In the 1980s and 90s, a slow but powerful cultural resurgence began. Young Ainu descendants, tired of hiding, started reviving the old language, dances, and rituals. The Japanese government finally recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people in 2008. Yes, that recently. They began teaching Ainu language courses, restoring ritual sites, and reopening conversations about land rights and identity. But here's what most documentaries miss. The biggest fight isn't legal, it's about memory. You can't revive a culture fully until people remember it existed. Today, Ainu designs appear in fashion. Ainu music is sampled in modern compositions. Traditional embroidery is now a mark of pride instead of stigma. Their stories, the ones passed down in yukar chants, are being recorded before they vanish. There's a cultural center in Shiraoi called Upopoi, built not as a museum of the dead, but as a national center for Ainu revival. It opened in 2020, just 4 years ago. Yet, ask the average American about the Ainu, and you'll get silence. Ask many Japanese citizens, and they'll tell you vaguely that they used to exist a long time ago. In the far south, another kingdom once existed. It traded with China, defied Japan, sang its history into coral winds, and lived under a flag that still haunts the memory of Okinawa. Before Okinawa became a tourist destination with resorts and beach umbrellas, it was the heart of a sovereign nation. A nation that didn't see itself as part of Japan, didn't answer to the shogun, and didn't share the mainland's identity, culture, or worldview. That nation was the Ryukyu Kingdom. Most Americans, and even many Japanese, don't know that for over 400 years, the Ryukyu Kingdom had its own kings, its own diplomatic network stretching from Southeast Asia to China, its own language, and a culture so unique that even samurai envoys wrote about it as if they were visiting another civilization entirely. This chapter isn't just about what the Ryukyu Kingdom was. It's about how it was taken carefully, systematically, and quietly, until a kingdom became a prefecture and a people became a footnote. Zoom out mentally. Forget Tokyo, forget Kyoto, forget the Japanese mainland altogether. Place yourself in the string of islands that arc between Japan and Taiwan, small, tropical, and surrounded by clear water. These islands weren't stepping stones to Japan, they were a world of their own. The largest island, Okinawa, became the political and cultural heart of the Ryukyu Kingdom. But kingdom doesn't mean isolation. Ryukyu was a maritime network, and unlike mainland Japan during most of its feudal history, it faced outward. Centuries before Japan opened to the west, the Ryukyuans were open to everyone east of India. Before unification, the region wasn't a single kingdom. It was divided into three competing polities: Hokkuzan in the north, Chuzan in the center, Nanzan in the south. These weren't tiny villages. They were organized states with military power, trade, and regional influence. But, like many tripartite systems in world history, unification was only a matter of time. Enter Sho Hashi. In the early 1400s, this leader of Chuzan conquered Hokkuzan and Nanzan, merging the island polities into a unified Ryukyu Kingdom. He established his capital at Shuri, on a hill overlooking Naha, the kingdom's major port. From here, Ryukyu wasn't just united, it was launched into its golden era. Here's something that surprises people. The Ryukyu Kingdom didn't see China as a threat. It saw China as an opportunity. Rather than resisting East Asia's largest power, Ryukyu chose a diplomatic strategy known as tributary relations. In practice, it worked like this. The Ryukyu king would send a formal mission to China. China would acknowledge him as the legitimate ruler. In return, China allowed Ryukyu access to international trade networks under Chinese protection. This system wasn't subservience, it was strategy. Tribute missions gave Ryukyu political legitimacy and economic access while allowing them autonomy at home. Chinese envoys brought royal robes, titles, books, and technology, items that elevated Ryukyu's social and intellectual status beyond what its small landmass should have allowed. Ryukyu wasn't trapped between empires. It navigated them. The kingdom's ships sailed to China, Korea, Siam, Thailand, Java, Malacca, Vietnam, and the Philippines. They traded everything from lacquerware and textiles to spices and medicinal goods. Ryukyuans acted as intermediaries, passing goods between different Asian powers, taking advantage of their neutral position. This maritime trade transformed Naha into one of the busiest ports in East Asia. When mainland Japan was locked in civil wars and isolation, Ryukyu was networking across oceans. The Ryukyuan language isn't Japanese. It's part of the same larger language family, but so different that a speaker from Edo period Japan wouldn't understand a word. Religion wasn't Shinto or Buddhism. It was a female-centered spiritual tradition. High priestesses held real power. In fact, the king's own sister, or female relative, served as the Kikoi Ogimi, the supreme spiritual leader of the kingdom. Ritual sites known as utaki were outdoor sacred groves, not shrines with wooden gates and stone lanterns. Songs and performing arts were unique. Court music, known as uzagaku, had roots in Chinese and Southeast Asian influence, not Japanese traditions. Even their architecture reflected hybridity. Coral stone walls, red-tiled roofs, Chinese courtyards, island simplicity. The fall of Ryukyu didn't start with the Meiji government. It began long before that, in 1609, when the Satsuma domain of southern Japan invaded. Led by the Shimazu clan, samurai forces from the mainland landed in the islands, captured Shuri Castle, and forced the Ryukyuan king to surrender. But here's the twist. Japan didn't annex Ryukyu outright. At least, not yet. Why not? Because Ryukyu's tributary relationship with China was too profitable to destroy. So what did Satsuma do? They turned Ryukyu into a puppet state. The Ryukyuans kept their king, their court, their flag, and even their tributary missions to China, but all under the shadow of Japanese control. The kingdom paid heavy tribute to Satsuma in sugar, textiles, and labor. Any documents sent to China were vetted. Taxes drained the islands. Ryukyu became a kingdom on paper and a colony in practice. For over 250 years, Ryukyu lived a double life. To China, a loyal tributary kingdom under the mandate of heaven. To Satsuma, a subordinate state delivering resources to its overlords. This deception allowed Japan to benefit from trade with China during eras when direct Japanese-Chinese relations were frozen. It also forced the Ryukyuan court to perform cultural gymnastics, maintaining two identities without exposing either. This historical trick is rarely discussed in textbooks, but it reveals something crucial. Japan didn't discover Ryukyu. It leveraged it. Fast forward to the late 1800s. Japan was modernizing, centralizing, and nationalizing everything. The Meiji government looked at the Ryukyu Kingdom and saw loose ends. In 1872, they declared the Ryukyu king a domain head instead of a monarch. In 1879, everything ended. Japan abolished the kingdom entirely, dismantled the royal court, and exiled King Shōtai, the last ruler of the Ryukyus, to Tokyo. The event is known as the Ryukyu disposition. On paper, administrative reform. In reality, erasure. The Ryukyu Kingdom became Okinawa Prefecture. The royal family lost authority. Shuri Castle was abandoned. The language was suppressed. Schools punished children for speaking Ryukyuan dialects. Japanese names replaced local names. This wasn't unification, it was annexation. Within a generation, Ryukyuan identity was treated as backward and shameful. Speaking the language in school could get you humiliated with a wooden dialect tag hung around your neck. Worse, the economic exploitation of Okinawa began almost immediately. The islands were taxed heavily but received little infrastructure. Farmers starved. Children were sent to work in mainland factories. Japan wanted Okinawa's land but not its voice. Then came World War II. Okinawa became the site of the bloodiest battle on Japanese soil, the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. Over 200,000 people died, including tens of thousands of civilians. Entire villages were wiped out in days. The Ryukyuan people weren't protected by Japan. They were used as human shields. After Japan surrendered, Okinawa wasn't returned to Japanese control. The United States took over, ruling it under military governance for 27 years until 1972. American bases were built over sacred land and farmland alike. Even today, more than 70% of US military bases in Japan are located in Okinawa, an island that makes up less than 1% of Japan's landmass. Japan treated Okinawa as part of the homeland when it was convenient, and as expendable territory when it wasn't. Today, most Okinawans are descendants of the Ryukyuans, but mainstream Japan still calls them a regional culture, not an indigenous nation. The Ryukyuan language is critically endangered. Only elders speak it fluently. Ritual sites are being fenced off by military land. Many Okinawans still identify as Ryukyuan first, Japanese second, if at all. And yet, the memory of the kingdom refuses to die. Shuri Castle, destroyed in World War II, was rebuilt. Festivals that once only existed in oral histories now fill streets with dancers in traditional robes. The old musical instruments, sanshin, still echo across villages and cities. What Japan annexed, they never fully erased. If Americans heard that France once absorbed Scotland and taught Scottish kids not to speak English, there'd be outrage. If China annexed Thailand and banned its language, it would dominate headlines. Yet Japan did exactly that to the Ryukyu Kingdom. And most people outside Okinawa don't know it happened. Even many Japanese citizens can't tell you the name of the last Ryukyuan king. This isn't a coincidence. It's the result of how national identity is built, by choosing what parts of history matter. In school textbooks, national identity is always clean and seamless. One people, one story, one timeless homeland. But Japan, like every great power in history, wasn't born whole. It expanded, it absorbed, and in doing so, it wrote over those who were here before, or those who never saw themselves as part of the mainland to begin with. These two cultures were not erased in the same way. In the north, the Ainu were portrayed as primitive, hunters with no kings, no cities, no civilization by Japanese standards. To the Meiji government, the Ainu were a problem to be solved, a rough edge to be polished down in the making of a modern Japanese race. In the south, the Ryukyu Kingdom wasn't seen as primitive, it was seen as annexable. It had a dynasty, trade, religion, language, and foreign ties. But its sovereignty clashed with the Meiji agenda of a unified imperial nation-state. So instead of wiping it out with war, Japan dismantled it with laws, titles, and paperwork. The message was different, but the goal was the same. Erase difference, absorb identity, expand the idea of Japan without acknowledging what came before it. Ask most people what makes Japan unique, and you'll hear the same old phrase. Japan is an ethnically homogeneous country. It's a national myth with political purpose. From the 19th century onward, Japan worked hard to project itself as a single identity state, one language, one emperor, one culture, from Hokkaido down to Okinawa. But in reality, Japan enforced homogeneity. It didn't inherit it. The Ainu and Ryukyuans weren't ethnic minorities in the modern sense. They were conquered peoples who became minorities only after losing sovereignty. Their assimilation wasn't an accident. It was designed. The fastest way to erase a people isn't war, it's schooling. For the Ainu, Japanese became the only legal language in classrooms. Traditional clothing was banned. Children were punished for speaking Ainu in public. Rituals like the bear ceremony were outlawed. The goal wasn't coexistence, it was transformation. For the Ryukyuans, schools drilled mainland Japanese history into children and taught them to see their own culture as backward. Dialect tags were used to shame students for speaking their mother tongue. Teachers told them Okinawa had always been Japanese land, despite the kingdom collapsing only a generation earlier. Before 1869, there was no Hokkaido. Before 1879, there was no Okinawa prefecture. The names were tools. Ezochi became Hokkaido, not a frontier of another people, but an extension of Yamato Japan. The Ryukyu Kingdom became Okinawa prefecture. Not a nation swallowed, but a region returned. Even the language of record-keeping changed. Ainu became former Aborigines. The Ryukyuan king became a domain head. Lands that were never part of ancient Japan were suddenly labeled as always having belonged to. History wasn't erased, it was relabeled. Japan sent anthropologists into Ainu villages to measure faces, bones, and skulls. They published papers claiming the Ainu were a dying race, destined for disappearance. Western travelers ate it up, photographing Ainu families like specimens in a human zoo. Meanwhile, the Ryukyuans were framed as distant, exotic Japanese. Not truly foreign, but not truly autonomous. Meiji scholars began claiming that Ryukyu had always been a tributary, vassal state of Japan, leaving out the inconvenient 400-year history of kingship and Chinese diplomacy. In Hokkaido, many Ainu families hid their lineage to protect their children from discrimination. Some didn't tell the next generation at all. Others blended their traditions into Japanese life quietly, speaking the language only at home or not at all. In Okinawa, Ryukyuans adopted Japanese names and customs out of pressure, not pride. But festival songs, spiritual practices, and dialects survived behind closed doors, in kitchens, in whispered prayers, and in old women's memories. For decades, being openly Ainu or Ryukyuan meant risking employment, opportunity, and dignity. Survival came through camouflage. If this journey opened your eyes to a history rarely told, don't let it end here. Hit that like button to help this story reach more people, because algorithms ignore what we stay silent about. And if you want more untold histories, erased civilizations, and hidden truths the world forgot, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications right now. One click from you keeps these voices alive.